On New Year's Eve, 2019, in the brutal darkness of an Alaskan winter, a veteran fishing captain with 45 years at sea keyed his radio and said the words every mariner fears most. Mayday, 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 Scandies Rose, Scandies Rose. We are rolling over. Within minutes, a 130-foot fishing vessel, famous in the crab fleet for being rock solid, vanished beneath 30-foot waves in conditions so violent that Coast Guard crews would later describe them as the worst they'd ever battled. 7 men were aboard, a father and his son, a captain colleagues called the most experienced fisherman they'd ever met. 4 crew members who trusted decades of hard-earned knowledge, procedures, and a stability rulebook that had kept this boat upright for years. Only 2 would survive. And here's the part that still makes this story sting. Investigators would ultimately determine the crew didn't break the rules that night. They followed them. So how does the tank go from legendary stability to gone in minutes? Hold that question, because the answer comes down to one invisible killer, and one critical number buried in paperwork that no one on board could see, verify, or question until it was far too late. The Bering Sea crab fishery isn't just dangerous work, it's routinely ranked among the deadliest occupations in America. Between 2000 and 2020, U.S. commercial fishing vessel accidents killed 805 people, left 164 missing and presumed dead, and injured more than 2,100. Alaska's winter waters have claimed more lives than most people realize. But the Scandies Rose wasn't just any fishing boat. Built in 1978 by Bender Shipbuilding in Mobile, Alabama, she was launched as the Enterprise, designed for one purpose: pot fishing in brutal northern seas. She measured 130 feet in length with a 34-foot beam, about 195 gross tons. She wore heavy steel, thick bow plating to take punishment, a strong hull and deck structure, and a layout built around the reality of crab fishing. Massive deck space, constant loading and unloading, and towering stacks of steel pots. Down below, twin Detroit diesel 12-cylinder engines delivered about 1,610 horsepower. Reliable workhorses meant to run hard day after day. But power wasn't her legend. Stability was. In crab fishing, pots can be stacked 5 high, rising near the height of the bridge, sometimes close to 20 feet above the deck. Every pound up high matters. Every shift in weight matters. And in winter weather, stability isn't just a design feature. It's the line between rough trip and do not come home. The Enterprise changed hands in 1989, became the Scandies Rose, and over the next 3 decades, earned a reputation that bordered on reverence. Crew members called her the Battleship, the Tank, not as marketing, but as testimony, a boat that could push through conditions that made others run for shelter. She worked Puget Sound, the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, year after year, without major incident. She even gained a bit of fame with an appearance on Deadliest catch. At her helm was Captain Gary Cobbin Jr., 45 years in fishing, roughly 40 as a captain. In 2009, he began skippering the Scandies Rose full-time and eventually became a part owner. That meant the boat's success and the safety of the men aboard was personal. The crew later described him as surprisingly safety-conscious, very thorough, better than other boats. In an industry where cutting corners can look like profit, Cobbin's reputation was the opposite. A captain who drilled the basics because the basics are what keep you alive. In the spring of 2019, the Scandies Rose underwent a thorough valuation and inspection. Dry dock, detailed survey work, that took months. The conclusion was glowing, well-constructed, exceptional workmanship for her era, built to a standard on par with the best West Coast boats. Market value is around $3.5 million. Replacement value, if lost, $15 million. By late 2019, everything about the Scandies Rose said proven boat, proven captain. And that's what makes what happened next so unsettling. December 29th, 2019, Kodiak, Alaska. Winter in Kodiak is dim light, hard wind, slate gray water, the kind of place where the cold doesn't just bite, it lingers in everything, metal and wet. Captain Cobbin assembled a 7-man crew, an engineer, a deck boss, 4 deckhands ranging from brand new to seasoned, and among them, his son David Lee Cobbin. Their destination? Fishing grounds in the Bering Sea, north of the Aleutians. The cod and opilio crab season was set to open January 1st, and the window was short, just a couple of weeks. When the season opens, boats move. Over the next day and a half, they prepared like professionals. The biggest job was loading 195 combination crab pots, large, heavy steel traps. They stacked them across the main deck in an interlocking structure, rows fore and aft, stacks rising 4 and 5 tiers high, chained down, secured, no tarps over the stack. They filled fuel tanks, loaded bait, stocked water, checked bilge pumps, tightened hatches, ran the pre-departure checklist that every winter captain knows by heart. On December 30th, Cobbin ran a safety drill, immersion suits, fire suppression, life raft locations and operation, EPIRB location, and how to make a Mayday call from the bridge. The crew signed the drill form. It wasn't just a ritual. It was a captain doing what he'd always done, training people to survive the worst day of their lives. Then came the weather discussion. Everyone knew the forecast was ugly. The National Weather Service issued warnings, gales and heavy freezing spray along their route. In Alaska, those warnings aren't rare. They're the background noise of winter fishing. Several other vessels departed Kodiak that evening as well. The question wasn't, will it be rough? It was, is it too rough? Based on decades of experience, probably not. At 8:35 p.m. on Monday, December 30th, the Scandies Rose departed Kodiak. The planned route would run through Kupreanof Strait, then into the Shelikof Strait, an infamous stretch between Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, then onward toward False Pass and into the Bering Sea. They set a watch rotation, Cobbin on 6-hour shifts, crew rotating in 1-hour turns during his rest periods, standard practice, designed to balance rest and skill building. The ship settled in at roughly 9 to 10 knots, routine until the first sign of winter's quiet danger appeared. Early morning, December 31st. By 2 a.m., the Scandies Rose exited the more protected waters and entered the Shelikof Strait. Wind increased. Seas built, and freezing spray began to form. This is how icing kills boats. Wave spray becomes airborne mist. Sub-freezing air turns into ice the instant it hits metal. That ice adds weight, especially high weight on rails, pots, deck gear, and superstructure. High weight raises the center of gravity and gradually reduces stability. From inside the bridge, the crew could see ice building on the starboard side, windward, where spray hammered the pot stack. By around 6 a.m., one deckhand estimated about an inch of ice filling in the pot mesh and coating the exterior railings. Another reported waves over the bow and ice building on the forward pots. But early icing doesn't always trigger panic. Ice removal is dangerous. You often need shelter, reduced spray, crew out on an exposed deck with sledgehammers and poles, climbing over stacks of steel, trying not to slip into freezing seas. Many captains wait until there's a few inches because anything less is hard to remove and burns precious time. At 8 a.m., when the watch turned back over to Cobbin, the vessel was still on an even keel. No list, no obvious instability, just bad weather, like so many trips before. At 11:18 a.m., Cobbin called the fishing vessel Amatuli via satellite phone. The conversation was normal. The Amatuli had pulled into sheltered water briefly because conditions were foul. Cobbin said it was very cold, with light icing and poor seas. No urgency, no distress, just another rough winter day until the day started to turn on them. By afternoon, the Scandies Rose slowed from around 8 knots to roughly 6.5, not because she was failing, because the sea state was building and forward progress became harder. Spray intensified as the bow punched through wave after wave. Spray froze, ice grew, and it grew where it mattered most, on the pot stack and superstructure, high and to starboard. This region also faces another hazard: violent, localized winds shaped by the terrain. Willowas, cold air dams against mountain slopes, then spills over in sudden powerful bursts. These gusts can arrive quickly, spike to hurricane force, and disappear again, leaving crews feeling as if the ocean is playing tricks on the laws of physics. As darkness set in, conditions quickly deteriorated. At 7:15 p.m., a crew member woke Cobbin early. That alone tells you things were changing. Experienced crews do not wake the captain unless they think it's time for the most seasoned eyes on the bridge. When Cobbin got there, they had a developing problem. A 2-degree list to starboard. 2 degrees isn't yet a disaster, but it's the first clear sign that ice weight is starting to win. They estimated around 2 inches of ice. The crew could temporarily compensate by transferring fuel between tanks, using it as ballast to counter the list. Not ideal, but not unheard of in winter conditions. They also had a destination in mind: shelter near Sutwick Island. At 7:30 p.m., the vessel was roughly 11 miles from potential shelter options. The decision most peers later agreed with: keep making for shelter rather than sending crew onto an iced deck in violent seas. At about 8 p.m., Cobbin called a friend to wish her a Happy New Year. He sounded calm. He mentioned icing, a slight list, and that they'd need to tuck in somewhere safe. Shortly after, he called the Amatuli again. The other captain advised, be cautious. Still, nothing about these calls sounded like a man expecting to lose his ship. But outside the bridge windows, reality was getting monstrous. Winds screamed 60 to 70 knots or more. Temperatures around 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Seas are pushing 30 feet. And the list, it wasn't 2 degrees anymore. It was around 20. 20 degrees is where a ship stops feeling off and starts feeling wrong. It's where walking becomes a constant lean. It's where gear wants to slide. It's where the margin starts to disappear. At 8:37 p.m., Cobbin called another vessel, the Pacific Sounder. He reported severe icing and the 20-degree list. He said it was too rough to send the crew out to break ice. He planned to seek shelter near Sutwick Island. Here's the unsettling detail. Even now, Cobbin's tone didn't strike the other captain as panicked. The conversation drifted into casual small talk. That's how hard fishing culture calibrates danger. Terrible conditions are routine until they're not. At 9:10 p.m., the Pacific Sounder captain ended the call to tend his own engine room. And then, at approximately 9:45 p.m., AIS showed the Scandies Rose making a turn, about 50 degrees to starboard, shifting course toward the refuge of Sutwick's southern bays. This turn meant to save them, likely sealed their fate. For roughly 20 hours, the Scandies Rose had held a heading where the prevailing winds were striking in a way that, while driving ice accumulation, also helped keep the vessel from rolling further. A deceptive crutch. Wind pressure was countering the list just enough to mask how close they were to the edge. When the vessel turned, the relationship between wind, waves, and that heavy starboard side ice changed. Suddenly, forces that had been partially holding the ship up began pushing in the same direction as the list, and the margin vanished. Below decks, 2 deckhands, Dean Gribble Jr. and John Lawler, were resting when the boat abruptly took a sustained lurch to starboard. Not a roll, not a wave-induced moment, a lasting, frightening tilt. Dean later said, "I jumped out of my bunk in a panic and ran upstairs. I knew something was wrong right away." At almost the same moment, the Pacific Sounder captain tried calling Cobbin back. This time, Cobbin's voice was different, worried. "I don't know how this is going to go," he said. "The list has gotten a lot worse." Then the connection cut. The Pacific Sounder captain tried calling again and again, 10 times or more. No connection. On the Scandies Rose, Dean burst onto the bridge. "What is going on?" Cobbin answered, flustered. I don't know. I think we're sinking." Dean yelled down to John, "The boat is sinking." Everything accelerated. The general alarm wasn't sounded, not because they forgot, but because the timeline had collapsed. The boat was moving past the point where procedures could keep up with physics. Their focus snapped to survival suits. The crew scrambled for immersion suits on the bridge, but the deck wasn't a deck anymore. The list steepened toward 90 degrees. Floors became walls. Loose objects slid. Men slid. The room became a tilted trap. Dean and John fought to put on their suits, helping each other. Others tried to do the same amid panic. Screams filled the bridge. "We're gonna die." The raw sound of people watching the end arrived too fast to process. Dean managed to get outside through a portside door. John followed, then finished donning his suit and helped Dean complete his. Inside the bridge, 5 people remained. Captain Cobbin, his son David, and 3 other crew members. At approximately 9:55 p.m., Cobbin made the Mayday call. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Scandies Rose, Scandies Rose, Scandies Rose. We are rolling over. The Coast Guard heard it clearly and immediately tried to reach the vessel. No response. Outside, Dean and John screamed into the bridge, "Get out! Get out! Get the fuck out!" They tried to find a line to throw down, anything to help the others climb up and out, but everything outside was frozen solid. Lines, rings, buoys. The same ice that stole the ship's stability had turned their equipment into an unusable sculpture. They were out of minutes. Captain Cobbin lost his footing on the nearly vertical deck and tumbled across the bridge, striking the far side. He screamed in pain. His son stayed with him. One crew member had fully donned his suit, but didn't reach the exit in time. Dean and John clung to the exterior as the Scandies Rose rolled further. The lights went out. Total black. Ice everywhere. Then a wave swept them off the hull and into the sea. 30-foot-plus waves. Wind gusts 50 to 70 knots. Water near freezing. They were separated immediately, tossed by the ocean like debris. Dean saw the Scandies Rose's final moment, the bow briefly rising, the vessel standing nearly vertical, then slipping straight down into darkness. The tank was gone. In the water, 20 minutes can feel like a lifetime. Then, Dean spotted a light, a life raft beacon. He swam for it with everything he had left, calling for John. John answered from the other side. Against the odds, both reached the same raft and climbed in. For a moment, relief. Then the raft's external light went dark quickly. Their immersion suits had water inside. The raft took on water as the seas splashed in. The survival kit was hard to access, with bulky gloves. They had to submerge into the raft's pooled water to reach supplies, fearing the raft might capsize. After about an hour of fumbling, they found the flare kit. They fired everything, because they believed if the boat's EPIRB had activated, rescue should already be near. But the first hour became the second. Then, the third. Cold seeped deeper. Hope thinned. Confusion turned to dread. Why isn't anyone here? At around 4 hours, they saw a distant light and began signaling with a flashlight. The light rose straight upward. A helicopter. The Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk had launched from Kodiak around 11:30 p.m., but the scene was roughly 170 miles away in terrible weather. Extra fuel planning, turbulence, severe winds. Everything pushed the aircraft to its edge. The rescue crew later said they expected bad weather. What they got was worse. At 2:08 a.m. on January 1st, Dean and John were hoisted into the Jayhawk, one at a time. While ice formed so quickly that the crew had to de-ice the rescue gear mid-operation. The helicopter was so fuel-limited on the return that it cut auxiliary power, meaning no heat inside. At 3:40 a.m., they landed back at Kodiak. Dean and John were treated for hypothermia and recovered physically. 5 men were still missing. The Coast Guard searched throughout New Year's Day with helicopters, aircraft, and the cutter Mellon. Even the cutter fought severe icing, so bad it had to stop to remove ice to protect its own stability. At 6:08 p.m. on January 1st, 20 hours after the Mayday, the search was suspended. Later, letters presumed to be death notices were sent to the families of Captain Gary Cobbin Jr., David Lee Cobbin, Arthur Ganasius, Brock Rainey, and Seth Rousseau Gano. So what happened? Here's where the open loop closes, and the answer is colder than the sea itself. Investigators ruled out fatigue, drugs and alcohol, poor maintenance, propulsion or steering failure, early downflooding, and hull breach. They also ruled out reckless loading and reckless decision-making in the way people like to assume. The crew followed their stability guidance. The captain made reasonable choices consistent with industry practice. The vessel sank anyway. The real culprit was a deadly combination: extreme localized icing, likely amplified by Willowa conditions and incorrect stability instructions. The Scandies Rose likely accumulated far more ice than the stability calculations accounted for, potentially inches upon inches, building fast and building unevenly. And crab pots are uniquely dangerous in icing because they aren't smooth surfaces. They're frames and mesh. Ice can build on external surfaces, and throughout the mesh and interior voids, multiplying weight in ways simple box assumptions don't capture. The stability instructions assumed icing levels and distributions that did not match real-world conditions, especially asymmetric ice buildup on a pot stack. Investigators found errors and mismodeling in the stability work. Incorrect volumes, incorrect windage assumptions, discrepancies in tank capacities, and other emissions. In plain English, the paperwork said there was more safety margin than there really was, and when the ship turned toward shelter, when wind and sea forces shifted from crutch to push, the vessel crossed a point it could not recover from. The official probable cause reflected exactly that: inaccurate stability instructions resulting in low margin of stability, combined with heavy asymmetric ice accumulation in localized conditions, more extreme than forecast. Afterward, safety recommendations followed: better icing studies on pot stacks, improved oversight of stability instructions, stability training requirements, better forecasting tools, and observation coverage, and a push for personal locator beacons worn by individual crew members. Because the vessel's EPIRB, the system designed to scream for help automatically, never transmitted. Without Cobbin's final Mayday, the Scandies Rose might have vanished without a trace. The Scandies Rose sank in minutes, but the questions it raised about what captains are told is safe, what's actually safe, and how thin the margin can become before anyone feels it, have taken years to confront. The sea doesn't care about your reputation. It doesn't care if you're the battleship. It doesn't care if you're the tank. When ice accumulates in ways we still underestimate, and when the numbers we trust are wrong, legendary vessels disappear like any other. The Scandies Rose is gone. But if the industry acts on what her loss revealed, the next crew that faces the ice might make it home. If you want another deep dive into a maritime disaster, leave a comment with the incident you'd like covered next. Subscribe for weekly reconstructions of real casualties and the lessons that prevent the next one. Fair winds and following seas.